Often we're talking about whether people are telling porky pies. This week we've been talking about actual pork pies in politics. Laura, what is the short version of why we ended up there?
Short version. OK, the short version is on Tuesday lunchtime, I happened to be talking to a government minister who was, shall we say, quite irritated. What are you irritated about? Well, they're meeting, they're plotting, they're meeting. And I said, oh, dear. What are you? Well, some of these 2019 people, and they're all, and, you know, one of them's the MP from Milton. It's the pork pie plot. Ha, ha, ha. And, you know, bit of a laugh, bit of a joke, all pork pie plots. I then went off and tried to find out who some of these people were and various things, and tried to find out if such a plot and meeting had actually taken place, and it had. And then the quote from the minister saying they dubbed it the pork pie plot was born, and now you've got a massive plate of pork pies, and so have you, and I've got one that I'm going to have later.
Anyway, enough of that politics rubbish. This is an excuse now to test out some pork pies from different pork pie purveyors.
Which look absolutely fantastic. I normally prefer a hot pork pie myself.
What?
Yeah. Back home in Yorkshire, you can buy them, and you walk out the shop, and as you bite into them, they're red hot, and the danger is the kind of fat kind of drips out onto the pavement.
Blimey.
But they are fantastic.
But now, if they're hot from the shop, I thought you meant like putting them in the oven. That's
No. Hot from the shop,
right, okay.
And then eat on the street. Shall we have a go? I'm going to taste this one.
Oh, you're having the one with a lot of jelly.
Yeah, let's give it a go.
Too much jelly in that one.
Too
much jelly in that
talk, Laura.
No, that's fine. Okay. Can any description? I don't know. Thinking of any kind of sage. I'm just
thinking that's really chuffing marvellous. That.
Yeah, jolly good. White pepper often the key in these kinds of situations.
Listen to this.
Yep.
I think we're getting into Laura's future career.
Oh, if only I could tell you.
She's looking for new opportunities. That one. Very nice moist pastry.
Oh. Ooh. You want a bit of crisp on the outside. You don't want it to be too
moist. A real
moist.
hint of pepper at the back of the mouth.
Told you it'd be pepper.
You're right.
Told you it'd be pepper. And some
first with the news yet again.
Porky goodness.
I caught up several minutes later. It's the story of my life.
Shall we get on with it, maybe? I mean, much as I'm sure the audience is enjoying watching you both eat pies, but should we...
Let's eat some news on Newscast.
One more piece.
Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in the same studio.
And Chris in the same studio for now, until I vacate this spot for a guest in a bit.
So actually we've got less COVID rules, but we've still got some COVID rules, which actually is quite a good summary of whether Plan B still exists or not, because some bits of Plan B in England still exist, but then some bits of Plan B disappear next week. But it has been quite a dramatic week, where the Prime Minister's fortunes have kind of ebbed and flowed, and then they've sort of relatively flowed compared to where they were ebbing before. It's all been, quite up and down.
It's been really up and down, and, you know, Downing Street's still in a pretty precarious position, no doubt about that. If I choose my normal metaphor of choice, the Jenga tower is very wobbly. Some big pieces have been taken out, a couple more maybe crammed back in, maybe a little bit of scaffolding for some ministers who've been more publicly willing to defend him. Some of them, not very many of them, but some of them have been more visible in the last few days. But things are very, very tough indeed for Downing Street. And there have been so many big kind of jaw-dropping moments this week, starting at the beginning with when we finally saw Boris Johnson emerge from his self-imposed self-isolation.
Self-imposed semi-self-isolation, because what happened was a member of his family had tested positive for COVID, and he was following the government advice incredibly strictly, which is to limit your social contact, which means for him, he could limit his contact with the media while dealing with this big unfolding story.
But then along comes an encounter with Beth Rigby of Sky News, doing this thing that we called in Westminster, don't we, a pool clip, as it traditionally was, where one of us, on behalf of all of the broadcasters, asks a couple of questions of a minister or the Prime Minister. And convention used to dictate that these things were relatively short.
Yeah.
But now we're into something of a febrile moment. There's another Westminster word pulled off the shelf at a time of, crisis for a government. No, exactly. An encounter with Beth Rigby that lasted, was it 16 minutes?
Yeah, it was long.
That.
It was fascinating, actually, that Boris Johnson stood there for all that time.
Yes.
And some people posed quietly to themselves, and I think this is probably true, if he had been suggested that he look sorry, very, very sorry, and really, really, very, very sorry for what had been going on. But should we have a listen to how it unfolded?
Nobody said to me, this is an event that is against the rules, that is in breach of what we're asking everybody else to do, should not go ahead.
2 boozy parties held in the garden, in the buildings of Number 10, the night before Prince Philip's funeral, when the country was in national mourning, was having to apologise to the Queen about those parties The night before she put her husband of over 70 years, she laid him to rest. Was that a moment of shame for you?
I deeply and bitterly regret that happened.
Now, the reason Boris Johnson was talking like that is because Dominic Cummings, his former advisor, had accused him of knowing in advance that this was an event that could have broken the rules.
Yes.
And so then this became a story about, does the Prime Minister even know what the rules are when he made them up himself?
Yes, and a question about whether or not he's telling the truth when he said, oh, well, I thought it was a work event. And nobody told me that it might be a party. So it goes to his truthfulness. But I think also a lot of people would have been shouting at the telly thinking, well, hang on a minute.
Nobody told you.
Nobody told me it was against the rules when he was setting the rules and he was giving press conferences every day announcing to people what the rules were. But let's see what happens. There's a lot of work going on into this. There is a spectrum of scenarios. And look, some of Boris Johnson's defenders and allies have said to me, look, remember, he just had COVID, crazy busy situation. Isn't it possible? And actually, your civil servants, if you're a big busy minister, do say next in your diary, go and do this. And you'd go, oh, right, OK, well, off I go. But anyway, huge amount to get through.
Then we got to Wednesday. And when Joe Coburn was presenting Politics Live on Wednesday before Prime Minister's questions, she thought the most exciting thing that was going to happen was about the pork pie plot, which we've already discussed. And then this happened.
Let me just show you this tweet from the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Hearing Christian Wakeford, the Bury MP, is defecting to the Labour Party, just as Prime Minister leaves number 10 for PMQs. Well, that is quite incredible.
And what a moment of drama.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, this happens so rarely, doesn't it? I was talking to a Labour shadow cabinet minister today as I was skulking the corridors, and I said, oh, what are you up to today? He says, I'm looking for defect. And walking around with a massive smile on their face. Because what a coup.
Totally. It hadn't happened since 2007. Massive coup for the Labour Party, no question about that. They've been plotting it for months with Christian Wakeford. And it's very rare. And you could hear there how happy the Labour Party were in the House of Commons. And definitely for the public, I mean, it's like bad luck, isn't it? Somebody leaves your party because they think the other side are now better. But
well, I was going to say, except in the meta-narrative of Boris Johnson, it ended up sort of weirdly being good.
Well, I mean, I think it depends who you ask, right? But what it did do is it gave unhappy Conservative MPs someone else to hate for the afternoon.
Yeah.
Because I'm not being harsh in particular about Mr. Wakeford, but politicians hate a defector. Remember how tribal politics often is, how much people feel it in their heart and their gut. And it's not just that you don't like us anymore. It's that you're going to go and join the other side. And it is seen as a real betrayal. And therefore you did see, at least for a few hours, Tory MPs going, well, that's not the way. And also looking at thinking, oh, who are we helping here? Are we helping ourselves or are we helping the Labour Party? But that doesn't mean all the woes disappeared. Far from it.
And then the world's most exciting PMQs got even more exciting when David Davis entered the stage and then quoted an MP from the Second World War who was actually quoting Cromwell.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
And that student of politics, Boris Johnson, claimed he wasn't familiar with that quote.
Well, he did, which might have been a way of like trying to avoid answering the question. But there we are. But what it was really electric. You'd hear one MP there going, "Shut up!" and sighs. People aghast. And at the end of the session, who wants to do a Lancashire accent?
All right, it's against my very being.
You'll be exiled from Yorkshire.
I've consulted the
What a
Constitution.
day.
Well, there we go. The speaker at the end, sotto voce. What a day. Amazing. And could have there been a better phrase for it? Absolutely not. It was crazy.
But then I suppose the question is, does it matter? I mean, it was a moment of huge drama, and he is a guy who was a minister back when John Major was Prime Minister and was Brexit Secretary a couple of years ago, and what a thing. But does he take people with him? Does he persuade others?
I'm not sure he takes that many people with him, David Davis, but he is a prominent person, so it creates headlines, it creates impression, it creates, it tells us that this is far from just fans of pork pie or anything else in the 2019 intake. This is a generational problem across the Tory party. And also, it is, I think, something that has been building for a week, and I think we've seen really profoundly this week. Downing Street's not in control in the House of Commons. They're not. They're just not.
Yeah.
They're not in control of their
Don't know what's
parliamentary
coming.
party, and they don't know what's coming. And that is, with an 80-seat majority, that's remarkable. And it's really, really serious. So either they've got to find ways of getting that control back, or they're in very deep trouble.
And then we got to today, Thursday, when we were recording this episode of Newscast, and 10 o'clock meant it was time for PACAC, the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee.
Is that already in your diary?
Of course it was. There was an alert flashing on Adam's phone.
I mean, some nights I can't sleep because I'm just so excited about what's going to happen at PACAC. Also because I have to get up at 4:30 every morning as well.
Pay yourself for PACAC.
And so PACAC was worth tuning into today for everyone because the chairman, William Ragg, who's quite critical of Boris Johnson, became very critical.
Conservative MP, though.
Yes, of one of the tactics that is often used around Westminster by the people that instill the party discipline, the whips. And this is how he lifted the lid on that process.
The intimidation of a Member of Parliament is a serious matter. Moreover, the reports of which I am aware would seem to constitute blackmail. As such, it would be my general advice to colleagues to report these matters to the Speaker of the House of Commons and the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police.
Goodness me.
Big words, though, aren't they?
Big words.
Police, blackmail.
I know. I thought you were going to say that Ragg lost his rag, but you didn't. So I got to say it. Yeah, I mean, there are very difficult conversations, very tough conversations. And yes, we all know, if you're in Westminster for a while, we all know that sometimes party whips, and I'm not singling out any particular political party, do make, cajole, strong arm, twist arms, persuade, and sometimes dangle what some people might call warnings, what some people might call threats, quite often enticements. Well, if you vote with us this tricky time, I know it's very difficult. Maybe there'll be a place for you as the junior minister for paperclips next time round. To call it intimidation and blackmail, blimey, that is a very incendiary claim to make. Other people have said, basically that's complete nonsense, really overblowing the situation. But it's interesting because, again, it shows us, even though he's a critic of Boris Johnson, it shows us that Downing Street can't control what their MPs are up to. And I think there's something wider as well. There's a bit of a generational thing there too. There's people going, you know what, actually, we don't like some of this behaviour that we've seen. I've been talking to MPs in the 19 intake about that this week. And it also shows you that generation is not afraid of the centre.
Yes.
Now, Chris, I'm afraid you're going to have to be led out of this studio and go back to your socially distanced news cupboard.
I will return to the boutique, the socially distant boutique of news.
It's not because we don't like you, it's because someone else is coming in.
There's an upgrade. So I shall stand aside.
Bye.
I shall defect. I'm crossing the floor.
And Chris is going to be replaced by Simon Clarke, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Hello.
Hello.
Get your giant headphones on.
Yes, absolutely.
Nice to have a government minister actually allowed in the studio. Yes. Both allowed to be on the airwaves and allowed to be physically with us. Now the plan B is disappeared.
There's one theme of this week. It's, of course, that we're trying to get much closer back to normal. So good to be here.
Well, there we are. Thank you for coming in.
There's so much we can talk to you about. But, I mean, first of all, we were just wondering, what is it like being the government minister sent out to defend lots of controversial stuff that maybe you didn't even have anything to do with?
Well, look, it's always good to be out there speaking for the government and making a case for what we're doing. So, no one would deny this has been a challenging week. And, for all the reasons which we all know well, it's important, I think, that we get through to next week and Sue Gray's much anticipated report, and that will allow us to have a discussion based on all the facts, which is, I think, what everyone wants now, that we get this report, we get everyone's perspective on what happened and the full context, and then based on that, the PM will come back to Parliament and give a statement.
What's it like, though, when you are the minister at the end of the phone and you see who's calling and you think, oh, does it have to be me? Because sometimes, and credit to you for coming on, it is the case at moments of real political risk for governments. Quite often lots of ministers don't want to come out and defend, and sometimes, perhaps not this week. Have you ever thought, does it really have to be me?
Laura, an evening with you, with Chris. I mean, what can I say? I needed no second invitation. But no, look, obviously, there are ministers out all over the place making the case, in good times and in bad. We all recognise that, what has happened in Downing Street isn't right. That's why the Prime Minister's apologised. And I think, we mustn't lose sight of the fact he has taken that responsibility for the overarching nature of what happened. It's the specific nature of the stuff which we're going to get into when Sue Gray comes forward. But it is absolutely vital as well that we also remind the public about the stuff that is going right. And this is a week where we've been able to make the move back to Plan A precisely because of the success of the Prime Minister's decisions both on the vaccine booster rollout, but also on not going for a tougher lockdown immediately prior to Christmas with Omicron.
But do you admit, though, even just a little bit, that part of the problem here has been how all of this is handled? Because you're quite right, there are huge, important, dominating issues in the world, but the thing is that your MPs and many members of the public have got really upset about is this ongoing saga. And you admit, even just a little bit, and I know you're very loyal, that it should have been handled better and quicker, and you wouldn't be having to talk about it tonight.
Yeah, well, I think you can be absolutely loyal and admit that this has been really difficult and frustrating. And the Prime Minister himself, I think, would say that he looks back on this in retrospect and wishes it had been handled differently. And that goes right back to the decisions, back in May 2021. So it's one of those issues where we are now absolutely determined, to use your phrase, to bring everything to light. I mean, some of this detail, of course, is stuff that no one was really even fully aware of. Candidly, there's a whole range of different perspectives.
Well, some people were, weren't they?
Well, indeed. But for example, what happened, Chris, when the Prime Minister was away in May 2021? I mean, he wasn't even in Downing Street that night. He was at Chequers and stuff like that.
You're referring to when the night before the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral.
Indeed, which was obviously, I think, in many ways, the most frustrating incident of all of this. I mean, that happened in his absence. There's no reasonable way in which he could have known about that. And so,
his son's swing got broken.
Well, apparently he wasn't. I don't know.
Did they run out and buy replacement swing before the boss got
repaired?
back?
I mean, there could be a whole saga around that. Okay. The point stands. He wasn't aware, in good faith, and I think it is important that we, this is one of a huge number of things that have been going on, and as I said, the only commitment I can give to viewers tonight is Sue Gray's report will be a definitive report. It is bringing together everyone's account of what happened.
And will we see the whole thing in full?
And well, I don't know. I mean,
so we might not.
The commitment is to bring the findings to Parliament, and I fully anticipate total candour in that sphere. The Prime Minister is then going to come and give a statement as well. I'm not involved in the immediate circumstances of its dissemination, but I think the whole spirit now is of just let the sunshine in and then answer the questions that flow from that.
You talk there about the most frustrating incident, which seems very focused on sort of government survival and PR rather than the outrage that people feel about some of these incidents that were going on when people were out on furlough, forced to work from home, couldn't send their kids to school, and you call it a most frustrating incident.
Well, it is frustrating. I mean, frustrating for me because I recognise that the enormous strength of feeling that this evokes, and I find it frustrating that this has happened. It is profoundly. It is profoundly frustrating that people have been behaving in this way. Well, I like to think I'm a fairly understated man, Chris, but of course I recognise fully the anger and the upset.
I bet it's not frustrating. I bet frustrating isn't the word that people in your email inbox are using when they're offering a view to you as your MP about what's gone on.
There are a balance of emails actually, and it is important to reflect.
50-50. Half of them say it's great, and others half don't.
Actually, over the last couple of days, it has been about 50-50 of people saying that they continue to believe in this Prime Minister and that they think this needs to be. He needs to be supported at what is unquestionably a difficult time. But look. No one is denying, and I'm certainly not sitting here denying, Chris, that there is real public anger and upset, and rightly so. What happened in Downing Street, as the Prime Minister has himself said, was wrong, and I make no qualification to that. It was wrong.
Is it wrong, though, too, that some Conservative MPs who've had concerns about this, who've spoken out, is it wrong that they feel they've been intimidated and pressurised into towing the party line? Is that wrong?
Well, I would absolutely say that intimidation in any walk of life would be wrong. I think in regard to the very specific allegation that's been made by Will Wragg today, I think
from PACAC,
that marvellous acronym. Look, all I would say is I do not recognise as a government minister and as indeed the government minister responsible for public spending that account of how government ever operates. I mean, not least because that's never how I or anyone in my associates would behave, but also because the civil service, of course, is there, and when I make spending allocations, do so on the basis of formal submissions by the civil service about how X policy should be delivered, and that goes to Y location, and it simply wouldn't be possible for me to say to my civil servants, well, strike that name out because they've not voted the right way. The system wouldn't allow it. And so, whilst I'm not in any way making light of the allegation, I think if there's specific evidence, it should be brought forward. In practice, I don't think it's a threat that could ever be realised.
That's different from the threat being made, though, I suppose. And like anyone who's spent any time in Westminster knows it's just one of those sort of legends that when things get tough, all sorts of enticements or bribes are offered or withdrawn. You must have just, as a backbench MP of a few years standing, have heard this legend too, that this is what goes on.
I mean, the whips have a job to do on both government and opposition side, and we shouldn't be naive about this. Their job is to make sure that government business is delivered, and that is a mixture of tactics that are legitimately involved in that work. And I don't think we would be being honest to viewers if we didn't pretend that can in times involve some robust conversations about what we were elected to deliver. And that is the nature of delivering on a collective policy programme to which MPs, when you are elected for a particular party, should sign up. That is obviously very different from public spending being brought into that conversation. As I say, I have never known that happen. It's certainly never happened to me, nor have I known any colleague ever go about doing it in that way.
Maybe you've just been a very good boy.
Well, I am a very good boy. I hasten to add, but quite seriously, it is not a tactic. It is not one we would ever put in motion, nor would the civil service allow it.
Simon, can we just play you then this clip from Christian Wakeford today? Now, the important context: until yesterday, he was a Conservative MP. Things have obviously gone wrong in his relationship with the Conservative Party. For whatever reason, he crossed the floor in dramatic fashion to the Labour Party. But he was asked about some of his reasoning today, and he was asked about his experiences of some of it. And I want you to hear this clip. You might not have heard it earlier today. Let's have a listen.
I was threatened that I would not get the score for Radcliffe if I didn't vote one particular way. This is a town that's not had a high school for the best part of 10 years. And how do you feel when holding back a regeneration of a town for a vote? It didn't sit comfortably, and that was really that kind of starting to question my place where I was, and ultimately to where I am now.
Now, you say you've never heard of it happen and it couldn't happen in the system. But as a Treasury Minister, as a Conservative Minister, listening to that allegation there, and I know he's crossed the floor and he's no longer a Tory MP, but listening to that, where we've got somebody on the record saying very clearly that money, resources for his constituents was dangled in front of him as an enticement to toe the party line in a vote. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, look, all I can say is that, if Christian wants to give an account of that to the common speaker, I mean, that would be the appropriate forum, I think, down which to proceed. I mean, obviously, any of these allegations need to be evidenced, really. That's the long and the short of it.
Do you believe it?
I mean, I would need to see the basis of the evidence on which he makes that allegation, Chris.
But would that kind of thing be acceptable, I suppose? And
Clearly, I do not think that is an appropriate way for Westminster to behave.
We've seen what Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, said on the Today programme this morning. We've seen what Steve Baker, your colleague on the Conservative backbench, has said, that this ultimately is about the culture of the government that you're a part of and that Boris Johnson leads, and whether it's the allegations from William Ragg or plenty of what we've heard about not just the parties during the various COVID restrictions, but also Downing Street's response to them, leaves many a bad taste in the mouth about how this government conducts itself. Has it damaged the image of politics?
Well, I think anything like this is corrosive, and I as I say, I think there is a depth of understanding and upset which is entirely understandable. We think about when we saw, for example, various high-profile footballers misbehaving during lockdown and these sort of things. It reminds you, people who have a
They're
place
not governing the country, though, and they didn't make the rules.
No, but people who have a high profile, who are very much in the spotlight, do have a double responsibility to to live up to the laws of the land. What I would say is I know the Prime Minister is genuinely and sincerely sorry for what happened, and I do not doubt the depth of that apology. He is mortified that this has happened on his watch, and as I think that has come across actually in his appearances in the Commons, and certainly in his private conversations with me. And so, look, we will have the Sue Gray report. There will be a full statement, and I think when that has happened, we will all be in possession of the full facts. And at that point, we move this conversation from one which is necessarily at times a bit speculative into one which is more or less on an agreed basis, and that will be quite a useful step forward, I think.
Well, let's move this conversation onto your day job as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. A quick fire quiz of various things that are around at the moment. So the Health and Social Care Levy comes in permanently in 2023, but before that there's a temporary increase to national insurance on everyone. Is that temporary increase for that 1 year definitely going to go ahead?
Well, yes, we are committed to that. And the reason for that is we've obviously got this enormous NHS backlog, as well as the long-standing problems we all know we face with social care in an ageing society. And you simply cannot fund the kind of increase that we're looking to deliver, 12 billion for the NHS budget and 5 billion over the next 3 years for social care. You can't do that without raising taxes. And I, as a Conservative, I fundamentally believe in a low tax, high growth economy, but I also believe in balanced public finances. And we've spent the thick end of 400 billion on our COVID response.
It's a big old check.
It's a big old check. And if you
end.
want to be honest with the public, and I think, I hope the fundamental hallmark of a Conservative government is always economic honesty about the tough choices sometimes entailed in delivering public services.
Okay.
You can't do it without
honesty.
Okay, so you've said very clearly you're not going to cancel the national insurance rise.
That is happening.
All right, let's go for economic honesty on something else. So some Labour's calling for a blanket cut in VAT on energy bills to help people with the cost. Some of your colleagues quite fancy that because it's something that some of them claim we can now do because we're not in the EU anymore. Economic honesty, is that remotely a possibility in the Treasury, or is that as ruled out as getting rid of the national insurance rise?
Well, we are always monitoring this issue, and that's why we've. Well, let me insert various caveats here. A blanket cut to VAT is not a very targeted way of helping people, because obviously much of the benefit, if we're going to be really techy, the distributional analysis would show that this benefits people with larger homes.
Yes.
Obviously they will.
You would get it, we would get it, just everybody would get it.
So we are always focused on making the most effective interventions to support households with the cost of living. That's why, for example, we've made the cut to the universal credit taper rate, which is targeted at the lowest earning families. That's why we're increasing the national living wage in April.
On this specific point,
look, the Chancellor keeps all taxes and benefits under review.
Well, we're grateful to you for coming in tonight and making this happen. Simon Clarke, Chief Secretary
Simon.
for the Treasury. Thank you
you.
very much
Nice
for
to see you.
talking to us about so many issues.
And isn't it good? Even though Chris was in a cupboard, he still got to ask loads of questions.
The miracles of modern technology.
Yes. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thanks very much for watching or listening. And if you want to listen to us every day on BBC Sounds, you can subscribe. And I think tomorrow I'm going to interview Armando Iannucci.
Oh,
I bet you've never watched any of his work.
What can I say? It's this job sometimes you don't need to.
Okay. Bye.
Reality TV for Westminster inhabitants. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.